Welcome to episode 7 of The Aspiring STEM Geek. In this episode, I talk with Ronald Anderson. Ron was the dean of the Fox School of Business, taught finance for over 2 decades, and worked as an engineer and project manager at a Fortune 500 company. In the episode, we talk about a variety of topics: pursuing a degree in engineering, innovations in the energy industry, the pivot to alternative energy sources, project management, Ron's research into family-led companies, and AI disrupting the teaching industry. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to episode 7, Professor Ronald Anderson. Thank you for coming on. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
All right. Well, you were my professor when I was at Temple University, and very lucky to cross paths with you. And I guess what we could start off is we're both originally from Pennsylvania. You are from rural Pennsylvania. I'm more suburban Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and I'm just always curious because I grew up closer to the city and in the suburbs, and the more rural life has been more intriguing as I've gotten older. I'm just curious what it was like to grow up in Pennsylvania in the more rural areas.
That's a really good question. Considering that the path my life has taken over the last 40 some years, I grew up in a town of about 6,000 people. There was about 330 kids in my graduating class. About 30 of us went to college. And I'm not even sure how many of us finished. Yeah, we were remote. There's no doubt about that. It was beautiful being out in that type of environment, rivers, lake, beautiful, beautiful forest. So growing up, I was well acquainted with the outdoors, and I love being outdoors. And even to this day, I still love being outdoors. I think the thing that we probably missed was there's a certain level of sophistication and education that goes along with being in an urban or suburban area. And my first real exposure to being in an urban area was I went from this little town of 6,000 people, a high school of about 1,200 kids, and I went to the University of Pittsburgh. That was a bit of a shock for me. But even to this day, I love going back up into that area I grew up in. I will spend a couple of weeks up there every summer. And it's just about being in the outdoors and so forth. I absolutely adore it.
Yeah, and were you more Western Pennsylvania?
It's northwestern Pennsylvania, about halfway between Pittsburgh and Erie. We had all the lake effect snows, and the winters were really dark and gray and snowy. I don't miss that. The summers, it was like being in God's country. It was always beautiful. The other thing I think that's important to know about growing up in a rural area, you tend to have a small group of close friends that you maintain a lifelong contact with. I think that's something, given the other places I've lived throughout my life, I still maintain many, many of those contacts.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I've told a lot of people, especially around my age or younger, how hard it is to keep in touch with people, how both high school and even college it's very transitory. And that's more something that's been coming up in just regular conversations over time with loneliness and everything. But I tell people you really need to try to stay in contact as much as possible.
And it's an effort. You have to put some work into it, but the reward is there in the long run. I mean, it's not about actually getting a reward. I shouldn't phrase it like that, but you have a richer, fuller life because you maintain contact with these people. The transitory way of life, I see more and more. Uh, I've moved around a lot over the last 40 years, and it is hard to stay in contact with people. It's especially given our work environments and how quickly they change. You're at one job for 4 or 5 years, then you're off to a new job, maybe the same company, same institution, and then you're off to another one. It's when you transfer into another one, another company or institution, those are the really hard ones to maintain and keep.
Yeah, definitely. And just going back to what you were saying about high school, you mentioned that only roughly around 30 of your cohort ended up going to college. Is that something you foresaw yourself doing, or did it just happen that you went to college?
Uh, no, that wasn't something that just happened. My parents were very focused towards education because education was the path to a better life. There's absolutely no doubt about the way we grew up. I have 6 siblings,
Hmm.
so I come from a really large family. All of us knew we were going to college from the day we could understand or walk, and we all did go to college. We all did well in life, and it was a very, very focused intent the entire time I was growing up. It was grades are important, reading's important, building that critical thinking aspect to life was very, very important.
That's great to hear, and so lucky to have great parents to kind of push.
Yeah, I'm
The,
not sure I'd go for great parents, but we'd go for good.
I understand. There's a lot. It's kind of thinking about it more, just how important early education is, and how just I always think about we recently and over the past couple of years went through COVID and the whole remote learning, and I'm very worried about all of that and in terms of the impact of it. I'll see if I can find some studies to link here, but I just remember even growing up in middle school and high school how hearing about a year or two of learning loss is very detrimental, and then you do that globally, and I'm just it's one of those effects that I don't know that people have thought about that much. They're kind of seeing it in some of the top line data where reading scores, math scores, but I don't really know if they people have really thought about just the overall effect on societies that that'll have.
I think for the kids that were middle school, high school, perhaps even early college, I think the 2 years of remote learning is going to be incredibly detrimental to their long term career prospects. Uh, by face to face learning, you're forced to deal with the rules, the regulations, the academic integrity, and so forth, and everything that comes along with it. One of the things that we experience so much, and I know it was endemic also in the high schools, is the level of, for lack of a better word, cheating that went on during these 2 years because the web has all the answers to any homework question that we can put up for them, right? And yeah, go ahead, get it off the web. But the problem is you're not learning the critical thinking processes. Uh, about the closest analogy I can come to this right now, let's say that you graduated from college in a deep depression or a US deep depression. What we know is that those kids who did graduate from college during those periods struggle immensely more during their careers. And in fact, by late career, they're probably not even in the same socioeconomic level or group as people who would have graduated during better times. And I think we're going to see this with those kids who lost 2 years. Some of the recent research I've read, though, suggests that grade schoolers probably be all right. I think where we need to focus effort were those on middle school, high school, and the first couple of years of college that did 2 or more years of virtual learning. It's not the best way to learn. And then the other thing, they lose all the socialization that goes with it.
Yes, and even though that this seems like a very doom and gloom topic, I just want to say I'm very positive about the future, even though it's just something that I think everybody just needs to think about, and you can't just push it to the back of your mind.
Oh, I don't think we should push it to the back, and I don't think it's doom and gloom.
Mm.
I, I've often wondered if maybe this is hard, and I don't see how society would have ever pulled it off if we shouldn't just have held all those kids back a year.
Mm.
But we will see how it goes. And, and motivated, well-disciplined people will catch up. There's no doubt about that.
All right. Well, let's go back in time a little bit again, back when you went to the University of Pittsburgh, and I noticed you studied geological engineering. I'm just curious. I knew going in to Temple, eventually from community college to Temple, that I was going to study finance. Is that it? Did you know that you wanted to study engineering, or through your just maybe first courses you decided to settle on engineering?
So this was one of the downsides of growing up in a really rural area. What I knew is when I graduated from college, I wanted a good job. And to me, a good job at that point was just something that paid a good wage. I could have a good living and so forth. I lived in Appalachia, and Appalachia was poor, very, very poor. And I was tired of being poor. And so I had a knack for math. I could do the sciences and so forth. So engineering was kind of a natural choice. Uh, did I enjoy engineering? No. But after 4 years of it, I ended up with job offers. And so I guess from that perspective, it did. I did achieve my goal as particular to mining and geologic engineering. Why did I choose that? Because it would be outside. You could get down in coal mines, or you'd be in open pit mines and so forth. And back in, late 70s, early 80s, environment wasn't very important to us as a society. It's way more important to me now as an individual. And interestingly enough, I never really did go into mining or I did go into geologic engineering later, but never into the mining engineering. And it provided a really good living for many years.
Yeah, I can relate on wanting to make a good living too. So it's working class family, but the big thing was middle school and high school was the financial crisis, and that hit my family particularly hard. And I I also wasn't a fully formed human being or anything close to it in high school or even community college. I still had a lot of growing up to do, but and not as well put together as some others, but finance was the goal because people in and I don't like I also should have probably thought about that some more given that we went through a financial crisis, but
it's funny because when I graduated from high school and started college, that was during the hyperinflation of Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan
that's
years. Right. That was incredibly painful. I mean, we were living at inflation rates 15, 16, 17% per year. My first mortgage after I graduated from college was 11.5%, and I thought I had a good deal. So, but that was as an engineer. So it's funny. One of the big changes I've seen in higher education and society is I think 40 years ago, we were more interested in when we came out about what was it going to do for me? Am I going to get a good job? Am I going to place well? It actually makes me kind of happy to watch students now try to find something they think they're going to enjoy, have a passion for it, because you're going to spend a lot of years doing whatever you're doing. Part of the reason my career is so storied is I didn't like engineering.
Mm.
And I eventually found other things that I did enjoy much, much more.
Yeah, I mean, I went through something very similar. My financial career wasn't as long as your engineering career, but about 3-4 years in finance before realizing it wasn't the industry for me. And it's also I tell younger people just getting into the workplace is figure out if you enjoy it. It's you won't be able to even do it in a year, maybe 2-3 years. I always think back and kind of kick myself because I for some reason think I could have figured it out sooner, but
I used to think that, but I'm not so sure. I think it's all right to search for a while, but in that process of searching, but you don't want to stop.
mm,
You can still go on doing things perhaps you don't like a lot, but continue going on. Don't stop waiting for the perfect situation to come along, because I figure it's maybe one or two people out of 100 that actually know what they want to do. The rest of us, we search. And to search effectively, you've got to keep moving.
yeah, I don't know. One of my favorite quotes: "Perfect is the enemy of progress." That's
There you go. Exactly.
So after college, you started work at Schlumberger, and Schlumberger provides technology for gas and oil companies for activities such as offshore drilling. Were some of the tasks that you initially were tasked with when you started at the company? Were you working as a junior engineer?
So so at Schlumberger, I had 3 or 4 different jobs. I had an 11-year career there. My first job is what you would call field engineer, and I was assigned to the Gulf of Mexico. So what we would do, it took 6 months of training after college. Schlumberger sent me to their training schools, and then they assigned me a mentor, and we went through that process. But after that, I would go out to oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. And these were active oil rigs, actively drilling wells. There's platforms which produce oil. There's really no need for anybody to be on that. But on a rig, you're actively drilling a well down to 10, 15, 20,000 feet.
Mm.
And so what we would do at Schlumberger, after the well was drilled, we would evaluate the formations, the geologic formations, to see if they bore oil, gas, water, whatever. And so typical job is, let's say that I would go out and work for one of the big oil companies. And they would say, what's down there? We drilled the well. Our initial indications are we think there's oil down there. So we'd go down and with our instrumentation, very, very sophisticated, high-tech instrumentation, and we do something called an oil well log, where you take these instruments and take them through the formations all the way to the top of the well. And then we could evaluate it down to a foot. So you're 20,000 feet down, and I could tell them whether they had oil, gas, or water, or nothing. And it was Schlumberger charges a fortune for this service. We were the best in the industry to do it. So I did that for about 3.5 years. The thing that was truthfully incredibly difficult about that job uh, because oil rigs are so expensive. Even back in 1982, $83, it was $50,000 a day to have an oil rig.
Hmm.
So in today's dollars, that's closer to three to $400,000 a day to have an oil rig out there. So oil rigs operate 24 hours a day. So we operate at 24 hours a day. And some of those jobs could easily last 48 hours, 60 hours. And, you just stay awake, kind of, and you just keep going and going. But it was I look back on that. What a great start to my career. Schlumberger was a company that valued excellence. I believe today it still does. And the other thing that Schlumberger was very good at was putting money in your pocket.
Hmm.
Made a lot of money during those first 3 or 4 years that I was out of college.
Yeah, it's important, and kind of getting more into knowing a lot more engineers. It's coming out of college, a lot of them are still doing relatively well, and that's
Yeah, and for some reason, we're money hungry bunch of people. Uh,
it's all is supply. It comes down to supply and demand, though. How many people can actually do those engineering jobs?
I think more than you believe. The problem is how many people can tolerate the 4 years of getting through it, right?
Yeah, that's especially the hardcore engineering schools like Georgia Tech, MIT. Hearing more story, I didn't experience it. I just got to hear their experience, and it is universally 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's just nobody's.
I mean, it's horrible. You calculus up through calculus 3, diff EQ, all the physics you can stand, fluid mechanics. And finally, if you're really, really lucky, maybe the last year of your engineering program, you get to specialize in something that might be halfway interesting.
Yeah.
But I do want to make it clear it was a worthy venture.
Yeah, and well, you mentioned some of the math courses. I'm just going to go on a quick tangent. I didn't realize that statistics wasn't really a core class, and I've spoken to some people that said statistics was the core, and so I got my graduate degree in statistics and was interested in it for a while, even back in undergrad. But what some engineers have described to me is going through school. That's yeah, if you couldn't do Calc 3, you could kind of finagle your way and do stats. And I'm like, I think everything's probabilistic. There's a lot of value in that.
Well, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but while I was getting my PhD, I did an incredible amount of statistics. Engineer going in statistics first course, it's difficult because we're taught 2 plus 2 equals 4. And in the world of stats, somewhere between 2 plus 2 is somewhere between 3 and 5. And I can give you a confidence interval on that. But having said that, statistics is probably a more useful mathematics skill because I think it can be more directly applied to much of the stuff that we're seeing in real life. Uh, Once I got over the fact that 2 plus 2 didn't really equal 4 with some range, statistics and econometrics became a bit easier.
Yeah, I know I mentioned this to you. I will officially start teaching next year. I'm very excited for it. Just one
Wow,
course.
congrats.
Yeah, Stats 101. But I've been stopping by the community college just to get a little bit of experience. I'm not teaching, but I've stopped by the professor's class that's currently teaching it just to assist where I can. And just going through some of the problems, like setting up a null and alternate hypothesis, it's I just realized at that point everything was just clicking. It's like, oh, okay. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's so much I don't know, but in terms of what I've specialized in, it's just clicking and going through and helping the students. Like, oh, if you want to set up this experiment, this you'd say that the null hypothesis is these two population sets are equal, or not sample populations are
Yeah,
equal.
same, equal. Yeah,
Yeah, but
no difference.
yeah, I appreciated I don't know if I've really reflected on it, but at that point, I really appreciated the education I've received so far.
The what that's it's interesting for me because even in my everyday life now, the one thing I think statistics and research taught me is I don't make flat out statements anymore, that factual statements. The
Yeah.
one can make a hypothesis, but yeah, I wish life were so black and white. And I think that's one of the big things that statistics taught me. That it goes all the way from white to black with all the shades of gray.
Yeah, well, that's the
The
big
what
reason why I studied statistics is because I realize that a lot of people see things in univariate terms, or like a univariate model where you only have one variable, and meaning everything else is held constant, but everything's multivariate. And I could be, this is another thing, like it's statistics, so there's also a probability I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure everything is probabilistic, so there's just so much value in statistics. But
I would agree with you. I think everything is probabilistic. I mean, well, I'm pretty sure the sun's coming up. It's not definite.
that's so funny. That's the example that I use. It's there's some things where it's near certainty, but you can't. It's 99
Can't be
point.
sure.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So at Schlumberger, like you mentioned, you were in the Gulf of Mexico working there initially, but I also know that you worked in France, South Africa, the Netherlands. How did you navigate the cultural differences and language barriers and other obstacles? And we're very lucky in that English is the most widespread language, but there's even if people do speak English, there's still a cultural barrier.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm going to take about a half step back.
Mm.
I knew I didn't like engineering, and I was getting better and better at it every year. But the thing about engineering, as you get better and better, it's like a pyramid. You get better and better at something. Now,
Mm.
it's far from multidimensional. And I, the other thing about an engineering career, it's a good career to make a good living, but it's limiting because the pyramid is kind of flat. And so one of the things that happened while I was at Schlumberger, and this would have been in 85, 86, the oil field crash. Oil prices went down to ridiculously low levels, $9, $10 a barrel and so forth. Actually, that would have been 81, 82. And so what Schlumberger offered to me at that point is because they were getting ready to lay off an incredible number of people. They said, how about you go back and get an MBA? We'll foot most of the bill for you. And the only requirement is that you have to be done in 1 year. And when you're done, you have to come back and work for us for several years. I'd seem like a really good deal. So at that point, I got into the University of Pittsburgh and their MBA program. And this was after 4 years in the field as an engineer, completed my MBA. And upon completion of my MBA, Schlumberger came to me and said, we're going to put you on what we call our internal auditing crowd or group. And you have a choice. You can live in Paris, France, or you can live in Houston, Texas. And I said, well, that's easy. Believe it or not, many people chose Houston. So I did the Paris route. And so going to Paris, I fell in love with the place. I did spend about 6 weeks in an immersive course in French language. to this day, I still work at speaking French. I'm pretty good. I'm not great. Uh, I've always been a naturally curious person. I've always been open to new experiences. So for me, living in Paris was like, wow, how can this be? And it was like a dream come true. Uh, and what I did is Schlumberger at that point had over 100 subsidiaries. And so there was a team of 8 of us in Paris. We would go out and visit the subsidiaries. Sometimes we do consulting gigs. Sometimes we would do auditing gigs and so forth. But it was called internal auditing, most amazing growth experience for me,
Mm.
especially after an MBA, because I got to meet the CEOs, the CFOs, all the big wigs
Yeah. Putting
to
the MBA to
understand.
work.
Just putting my MBA to work, and you could see the difference in the way those people work as compared to an engineer. It was something that really attracted me going into management and learning to manage engineers and businesses and so forth. So, but back to your question,
Mm.
yes, I lived in Paris. I lived in the Netherlands. I lived in South Africa. I lived in South America. The only thing I can say is I wish I'd lived in each one of them longer.
Mm.
Uh, they were all amazing, amazing experiences. The Netherlands, I lived just south of Amsterdam and in Paris. I lived right in Paris. Those were amazing cultural experiences of opening my eyes to the things that life offers, the reasons you should travel to Europe and so forth. The African experience and the South American experience were quite different.
Mm.
Uh, there, you see how non-Westerners live,
Mm.
and you become incredibly appreciative of all we have as Westerners, and even more appreciative of all we have as Americans. Uh, we have so much here. And I would see the poverty in Africa. I would see the poverty in South America. And there was times it would bring tears to your eyes. Having said all that, it was the biggest growth experience I've probably ever had in my life, being and working on those 2 continents. And again, it was the same thing. We were searching for oil and gas. South Africa, we were searching for gold, I should say.
Mm.
And but what an amazing experience having to manage locals and expatriates and so forth. I loved it. It was something that I thought I could have continued doing longer. But having said that, Schlumberger, the way I worked for them, you got an assignment for 18 to 24 months, and then you moved on. 18 to 20. And so there was really not much of a chance to develop a stable lifestyle. And that works for some people. I kind of liked it for all the years I did it.
Yeah.
But I also got tired of
Yeah. There's the when you're a younger worker, that it's very appealing, and then typical progression in life, you eventually want to settle down. And I haven't worked internationally, but I've worked across the states in the U.S. from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I could tell you that it can be a lot to uproot yourself that frequently. But
I think the one thing I've learned over the 40 years of my career, 40 plus years of my career, balance is really important.
mm,
I didn't have a whole lot back then. So
yeah, it was the Reagan years. Go, go, go.
go, make money. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
exactly.
but I guess pivoting more towards just this is something I've been curious about to the engineering. A big technological breakthrough was I guess hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, the combination of both of them. And when people refer to fracking, I think a lot of times they're referring to this because over the past 3, 4 decades, specifically within the United States, the growth in correct me if I'm wrong, is it both oil and natural gas or just natural gas?
It's both.
Okay. And that's come from hydraulic fracturing where
And horizontal drilling. That's
yeah.
really important.
So the way that it works, and if I mess this up, I'll let you re-explain this correctly. You would drill down for a pretty deep well,
Several thousand feet.
and then once you drill down, you horizontally drill, and then you use something like a combination of water, sand, and maybe chemicals to
Right. Yep.
send through the drill that you just the hole that you just drilled, and that breaks up the bedrock or usually shale, and that releases the oil or gases. I'm just curious, did you kind of see that progression in the method for doing that while you were at Schlumberger?
So I saw the horizontal drilling for certain. That was a huge challenge for us because we would send tools down the wellbore and we were relying on gravity to get it to the bottom. And all of a sudden, it's flat. So nothing, gravity doesn't work, right? So that became a huge, huge issue for us and something technologically that we ended up figuring out by pumping the tools down and so forth. Uh, Horizontal drilling has been amazing for the industry. It's more environmentally friendly. It's immensely more efficient. You need fewer wells and so forth. So that part's been amazing. The fracking, you don't have to be horizontally drilled to frack. It could be in a straight well or a horizontal well. The fracking is pretty amazing in itself because most laymen, when they think, or lay people, when they think about oil and gas down there, they think it sits in a lake and or some type of void. It doesn't. It resides in the pores of rock, and the rocks are typically sandstone, shale, or limestone. And sandstone is pretty brittle, easy to work with. Limestone is hard, hard, hard. And shale is just, we've all seen shale and played around with it. It's very layered. So fracking really made extraction of the oil and gas from these three types of stones much, much easier. And whereas you would typically only probably get 30 or 40% of the oil from an unfrac well, you're going to double that now.
Mm.
And that's huge. That's why we've had this energy revolution in the United States, is we can horizontally drill and frac. And so it's been good for the economy. It's been good for the oil and gas industry. This has, I'm an economist now, or financial economist. It has both its cost and benefits that go with it.
Yeah. And in terms of just a lot of times it gets referred to as a bridge energy where coal again, I'm not I'm not
No,
an engineer.
I'm an environmentalist. I follow this stuff closely.
Yeah. So besides reading articles, I have no I don't do this professionally, but I did get to see this through, I guess, the financial lens. The financial company I was working with, they had investments in some LNG facilities, but the thing is, it gets compared to coal a lot because coal is relatively dirtier, and
A lot
it's
dirtier, yep.
yeah, and the big issues with all there alternate energies, specifically cleaner energies like solar and wind are great, but the issue is sun sets, wind doesn't always blow. And also, an issue with nuclear is the time to build a nuclear plant. And a lot,
What do you do with the waste? And
yeah,
yeah,
and a lot of and I think that there's credibility to the argument where natural gas is necessary as a bridge, because realistically, you just can't 100% go to clean energy. And there are some countries, such as Germany, that are learning this lesson, where there's issues with going full, and even nuclear plants are shut down there. So that there's a lot of value in LNG, or liquefied natural gas.
I agree. And so we get back to the major issue, uh, climate change, and and the amount of carbon in the air, and i.e. global warming. So we can't, if we believe the science, and there's reasons to question it, but not a whole lot of questioning. We can't continue to pump carbon into the atmosphere. I mean, we know that carbon warms much more quickly than normal oxygen-based environment. So we need to figure out how to reduce the amount of carbon that we're emitting. Uh, Getting rid of coal has been really painful, from jobs and so forth, but we're getting there. Uh, Gas is a good bridge for us to figure out what the future looks like. It's way, way cleaner than coal and oil, for that matter. Uh, Ultimately, though, we need energy, and we're energy pigs. So where's this going to come from? So we'll get some from solar. We're getting really good at solar. We're getting pretty good at wind. The hydroelectric stuff, the dams, that was an environmental disaster. So the next step's going to have to be fusion or fission. And I don't, the United States is very, very reluctant to go to nuclear. I wish, I think if you were even to talk to the Sierra Club now, as compared to 40 or 50 years ago, they'll probably say, what a mistake not doing more nuclear. But somehow or other, we're going to have to do this bridge if, number one, you have to buy the science on global warming. That everybody's got a view, right? And I kind of do believe most of it. And I do think that we need to quit emitting so much carbon into the atmosphere.
Yeah. Well, you know me, I'm an optimist, so I think we'll figure it out. Getting to know a couple of nuclear engineers, something that's exciting. We're not quite there yet. I kind of want to look into this from China, because they apparently have more modular nuclear reactors. And
Right.
these reactors are relatively small, so it can take, I think the latest nuclear reactors that were built started in 2009, and they just finished a year or two ago in Georgia. And the selling point of modular nuclear reactors is that they're a lot smaller, they're easier to build, and that'll be an interesting technology to watch over the coming years.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I think fission is, it's certainly the next 25 years, unless we get lucky and someone can figure out how to do fusion in a really energy efficient way. I hope it's fusion. I think in your lifetime you will see it. Whether we can scale it at that point is different. But once we have fusion, all these energy problems go away. The political problems won't go away, but the energy problems will.
Mm, yeah. Well, we'll see in the future. Again, I think we're both optimists, so we'll
Yeah.
just kind of see how it turns out. All right. Well, you mentioned that going from engineering, you started to enjoy management a lot more, and you received your MBA. Then you started working on your PhD in finance at Texas A&M. I'm curious how you decided to go into finance. I'm sure it's related to project management at Schlumberger. But when you were doing your PhD, were you full time doing that?
I was a full-time PhD student at Texas A&M. I, that was a really big career change going
Mm.
from being a manager at Schlumberger to to making a decision to be a PhD, to get it, to earn a PhD. Uh, so my thinking on that was, and this is going to sound a little arrogant and it's not meant to, uh, I figured out that management is kind of all the same thing, that I could manage 200 people, I could manage 600, I could manage 2,000 or 40,000, but it was still the same thing. And it was interesting. It was challenging. I'm not sure it was fun
Mm.
because you're dealing with so many different human dynamics. But I, I think what kind of got to me at the end is I'm a very curious person. I like to learn. I love learning new things, seeing new things, new experiences. And as I was a student, whether it was undergraduate or during my MBA program, I watched what professors were doing in terms of research and what a huge part of their life that took.
Mm.
So we as students would watch professors and wonder what the hell they were doing because they only teach 2 or 3 classes a week. So the other 40 or 50 hours, they're working on research projects that interest them. And so I saw that. It just seemed like an amazing opportunity to have a career that was devoted to learning and growing. And so I went off to get my PhD. Why finance? Uh, that's a really good question. So I was kind of had a toss up between operations management
Mm.
and finance. And when I started looking in closely to them, I think my skill set, it would have been fine in either one. But I found that finance was very, very interesting because at the base of every organization, whether it's a corporation or university or nonprofit or whatever, you have to have a solid financial base. And this solid financial base has to be sustainable, long-term sustainable. And so it was that perspective from institutions and organizations that I found finance incredibly interesting. And there was also the side benefit that when you do finance, you learn about investing and all the good things that come from investing. You become a smart investor and so forth. But to me, what I loved about finance was more from the organizational perspective.
Okay, yeah. Some of the research papers, I'm not sure what your PhD thesis was. I should have read it, but I know that you
It's all right. It was on corporate governance and how executive pay gets set.
got, yeah, lots of interesting things with options if people want to do deep dives in that. But I
Yes.
know you also did a lot of valuation of firms that were closely held by families, and that's pretty interesting to see. I'm trying to right now all the European companies are coming to mind, so maybe not the best examples like LVMH. I don't know what their financials look like, but I always kind of think I don't know. I guess I'm kind of curious of what you've learned from all of your research into that.
So what actually got me into it is that when I worked for Schlumberger in Paris, Schlumberger was one of those European companies where the founding family still owned between 25 and 30% of the company.
Wow, didn't know that.
And one of the founders were long gone, dead, but one of the daughters would come in. She'd be in her 70s or 80s. She'd come in once a quarter to pick up her dividend check for $90 million. And and it was interesting to me because in the United States, in the world of finance, we have a very negative view of these families that maintain large stakes in these publicly traded corporations. So when I came back, that wasn't my view. Especially as a PhD student, I actually found that the Schlumberger family was quite good to the company. They loved it and they would do anything for it. And I said, well, what would make this any different for an American family? So I undertook a really deep research study. And so you talk about the companies here, like Walmart. Sam Walton started it. The Walton family still owns about 50% of that company, which would make them the richest family in the world. The DuPonts, they started that company in 1796, and it was only in the 70s and 80s, 1970s and 1980s, that they kind of got out of the company. The Ford Motor, they still are controlling shareholders there. And I could go on and on. I mean, about 30% of all the companies in the United States are still controlled by the founding family. And so what we did is we hypothesized that they must be horrible for the other shareholders. It
Just
was a
collecting
hypothesis.
dividends.
Yeah, they're pulling out big dividends. They're figuring out other ways to get money out of the corporation. And lo and behold, what we do find is that these companies that do have these founding families are better performers. They have higher valuations. They have better accounting profit. And that was kind of a big, no one in the finance industry thought about it that way. And from a purely rational perspective, why would you stick around in a company as a shareholder if you're not doing something good or stealing for that matter? So yeah, we found that they did a good job and that it published well.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I guess I never really thought about that, but might have to read a few of your articles in that. So you finished your PhD at Texas A&M, and then you started at American University, and that is in Washington D.C. How was that experience into what I know that you were teaching beforehand, but now this is your full-time job besides research?
Yeah. So coming from Texas A&M to American University, uh, Texas A&M would have been very much like Temple or Penn State, blue collar, working class kids from working class families. American University is for all those kids that didn't get into Ivy League schools and great students coming from very, very affluent families. It was a joy. I enjoyed teaching there. The experience there, though, was very much focused on the student
Hmm.
and not so much on research. I
Okay.
love that. I was there for about 12 years. It was an amazing, amazing experience.
Yeah, I something that I've not being a PhD student or going through that process, kind of just knowing PhDs. I've been very I haven't really thought about it recently, but I've been really skeptical about handling both research and teaching, and I've thought about the separation of the two. And I'm just curious about your thoughts on that.
So I think where higher education's going, first off, we can't continue uh, to price our product where it's at. It's not sustainable for families, students, and so forth. So I think that's going to play a big effect in how you see the research and teaching mission. Harvard's endowment is so big that they never have to charge tuition forever.
Thank you, David Swenson.
Yeah,
or
they
or maybe
will,
the
but
or
they
maybe
don't
the more.
have to. So, a place like Harvard, I think research will always be the top priority because they can afford it and they can still provide the students a, 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 a a good a good learning experience. Uh, Having said that, as an undergraduate at Harvard, you can find way better learning experiences at other institutions. As a graduate student, probably not so. I think most of the state institutions, however, are going to have to focus more on teaching and a little bit less on research. Research is really important. It's going to keep your great faculty there. But when you're paying a finance professor $400,000 a year to write a paper every 2 years, teach 3 classes, that's not a sustainable model any longer. And so I think the market will just cause this divergence. Those that can afford research will do it. It's almost a luxury at this point.
Mm. And I guess we can transition to your time at Temple. Were you when you came to Temple, were you right off the chair of the finance department or okay.
I started right off as the chair of the finance department, and that was an interesting experience.
Mm.
It,
Back to the
the
management side.
Yeah, we're back to the management side. I think all the deans and senior administrators say, "Oh my God, he was a manager in corporate America or international, and he'd be a really good department chair." And so that kind of set me down that road. I was a good department chair.
I
Uh,
can vouch for that as a former student.
yeah. And so what you do is you balance student needs. Actually, there's never a balancing act. Student needs are always number one, faculty number two. And that's what makes it so hard is that students don't know what they need and faculty think they know everything. And so you just keep no, this is what the students need. This is what we're going to do.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious. So you mentioned and again, don't want to get into potentially hot water anywhere, but the salaries of professors, that's obviously a very high salary. But
It's based on market and
mm,
so forth. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I won't get into the student loan things because it's one of those interesting in fields markets that's kind of I don't know, maybe obscured, but rather than focusing on the professors, I'm kind of curious about the administrative side, and there's been a lot of talk of administrative bloat. And I'm just curious from your perspective as somebody that chaired a department, is that something that you saw, or is it not as grave as some people make it out to be?
It's definitely grave. Uh, and what's happened with this administrative bloat, and I think what's prompted it, is faculty become less and less engaged with student academic experience. And someone needs to advise students that higher education is one of the most opaque products that we sell in society.
Mm.
And no one knows it better than faculty. But as faculty became less engaged with students, we needed people to come in and help students. And so that started the part of the bloat. And then the other bloat is at senior administration. Uh, all these initiatives that we have to do, whether it's DEI or sports or buildings and campuses, it requires people to manage it. Uh, College has, I think, perhaps 70 years ago, you went for an education and now you go for an experience.
Mm.
And to manage that experience, you need more administrators. I do think we need to rethink this. It's someone graduating from a state level school with $120,000 of debt. That's unforgivable.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And before we pivot towards the fun questions, since we're getting towards the end of this, I don't know
Yeah,
if you've ever seen the chart of the highest paid public officials by state, and it's almost always head coaches, usually football, sometimes basketball, and
it's almost always football coaches.
yeah. There's some
It's almost
outliers.
Harbaugh out at Michigan when he was there was making $40 million. Jesus.
Yeah, one of my a lot of my friends disagree with this. I'm not. When I was younger, I really enjoyed sports, specifically watching them. But nowadays, no time, and it, I really think that there has to be like a disentanglement of sport from college, and it just they should be paid. They're professionals, and it's not a real university function. And but my
Not
unpopular
the way it
take,
is right now. I would prefer that the top X number of colleges just disinvested with it and have NFL or NBA farm teams.
yep, yeah,
Use the baseball model.
I 100% agree there. All right, let's get
Yeah.
into the fun questions now that we're getting towards the end. You're very well traveled. Obviously, you've worked in a bunch of different locations. Can you name a region or country, if you want to get specific, that you enjoyed living there the most? Or is that too hard of a
Yeah,
choice to
that's
make?
an easy one. I love going to France and being in France. The French, they have a bad rep in the United States for which as being snobby or something. They're not snobby. They're just very conservative, demure,
Mm.
private people. And Americans were anything but. And so I love being there. I love their culture. I love their food. The French have perfected life. They have a really good balance between work and fun. We Americans mostly concentrate on work. The French, they have a really nice balance. I love being there. The other country I love traveling in a lot is Italy. But it's very much like France.
Mm.
And I also speak some French, so it's fun to go there.
All right, great. And what countries, if any, are you planning to visit in the near future?
So something on my bucket list is that I want to do the Nile,
Mm.
Egypt, the Nile River. It's not the safest place to travel. So I'm hoping I can get there in 2025. I want to get down to Luxor and Aswan, and I want to do Giza. It's just something that's always been on my list. The other place that I've traveled a lot is China, but not in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
China is every if you get the opportunity, every American should go to China. What an amazing experience. It's so eye opening. The city of Shanghai makes New York look tiny. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I have not been to China yet. I have been to Vietnam and I loved it. And this is for people in the United States. We're just so saturated with Vietnam movies, specifically Vietnam War movies, that it really did kind of obscure my what I initially thought I'd get there, and that it quickly dissipated when I realized, oh, I watched way too many movies.
What? And it's almost the same thing with China. It's like, wow. And those cultures are so old.
Mm.
I mean, I went out and saw the Terracotta Warrior,
Oh
2,200
man,
years old.
that is really
That
cool.
it was just amazing. So yeah,
Okay. I guess these aren't really fun questions, but I think that they're very valuable for people. So, advice for two sets of people, what advice would you get gives for a student or just anybody that's looking to work in the engineering field? And then what advice would you give to somebody that is thinking about getting their PhD in teaching?
So in the engineering world, it's funny. I think there's kind of like two buckets of people that search it out. Those that have a deep passion for a specific topic, like whether it's computer engineering or bio or chemical engineering, and they have really, really deep passions. Pursue it, get your professional engineering certificate, and so forth. It is an amazing, amazing career. And then I think there's a smaller bucket of people that were like me. Uh, I want to be an engineer because of all the benefits it can bring in life. Uh, do it. It's a really, really good way to get started in life. I can say of all my degrees, I'm most proud of my engineering degree because it was the hardest,
Hmm.
far and away. Uh, and it provides a way of thinking. Engineering provides a way of thinking that will stay with you your entire life. Engineers are meant to solve problems. Whatever it is, it's still a problem, whether it's chemistry or geology or computer science. And you take that every place with you, wherever you go. You just want to solve problems. So it's an incredible skill set to learn. On the PhD side, I have deep reservations on this now because of AI and ML.
Hmm.
Um, we're not far from the fact that a computer is going to be able to teach an undergraduate better than a professor. It's going to know your weaknesses. Let's say you're taking a course in calc. It's going to figure out, well, you never really got first derivatives very well, so you're obviously not going to be able to do a second derivative. This is something that professors never going to know. So
Hmm.
I think AI and ML is going to have a huge effect on higher education on the teaching side.
I could see it not taking jobs, but significantly bringing down that 400K salary as because I use the large language model, specifically ChatGPT. It is so I program, I do machine learning, and it is a very valuable tool. And I do think it's another tool that makes you far more productive. It like everything, it's hard to figure out where it's going to go. I I would have to agree with you. Definitely not replacing professors, but I would have to guess
It's
that.
I think it's actually going to replace a fair number of them. It's just it has to get better. I mean, where it's not hallucinating and things. But for teaching someone algebra, unless you need this is you may need the socialization that goes with this. So maybe it won't work as well as I'm thinking. But I do believe that AIML is going to have a huge effect on the teaching portion of being a researcher, a professor. On the research side, I can already tell you the effects it's having. Uh, let's say I want to, one of the things that as a researcher, I always want to do a unique hypothesis,
Mm,
something that no one else has done yet. Well, that used to take me 6 months in 1995 to figure out if anybody had done it. All I have to do is open up Gemini or Chat GPT or Copilot, type it in. It comes back in 30 seconds and said it's been done by X, Y, and Z. Well, can you give me a derivative of that that might be interesting? It's scary.
yeah. Well, I what I will say is I take solace in knowing that this is disrupting more white collar jobs than blue collar jobs.
Yeah.
because I mean, people talk about this now, and I kind of fell into this as well, where I did believe trucking will be automated, but the physical world is very hard. And going back to what you said about the teaching being an opaque product, and I don't know if we could really define it well, but it's it's kind of funny where we would think that something that is very cerebral is that's what's being really disrupted compared to what we thought would be manufacturing jobs or Uber drivers.
See, you're never going to disrupt a nurse's job
Mm.
or a physical therapist job.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, you will disrupt a dentist job though, right? And so some of these things are going to be disrupted, but I do think a lot of the cerebral stuff will be. I feel bad for accountants and lawyers in particular, especially academics. Uh, why would you even need a lawyer once you've got Chat GPT correct? You have to get big caveat there,
Yep, yep.
correct? So yeah, that's these what what I've noticed that Chat GP can't do yet, and I think this is what the Elon Musk and those of the world think about is that once it gets creative, then we're all in a little bit of trouble because right now the large language models AI it just uses the existing knowledge base.
Mm.
Someone still has to add to the knowledge base, and that's mostly been humans so far, but it will start adding to the knowledge base on its own.
Yeah. I I'm not sure. I'm curious about. It's one of those things. Wait and see. It's also it's so hard because it's in its obviously artificial
It's in its
intelligence.
infancy, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say it, but machine learning's been there for since the 50s. It's definitely leaps and bounds from there.
But but I think the real issue there is that it works on the existing knowledge base.
Mm.
And what humans are good at is innovation and imagination. I hope AI and they'll never get there.
We will see. That is
We will see.
a question for the future. Ron, thank you so much for coming on. This was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you, Adrian. I very much enjoyed it myself. And if there's any time you'd like to talk about another subject, let me know.
Will do. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye.
I pulled into Nazareth, was feeling about half past dead. I just need some place where I can lay my head. Hey, mister, can you tell me where a man might find a bed? He just grinned and shook my hand. No was all he said. Take a load off, Fanny. Take a load for free. Take a load off, Fanny. And you put the load right on me. I picked up my bag. I went looking for a place to hide. When I saw Carmen and the devil walking side by side, I said, hey, Carmen, come on, let's go downtown. She said, I gotta go, but my friend can stick around. Take a load off, Fanny. Take a load for free. Take a load off, Fanny. And you put the load right on. this Moses, there's nothing you can say. It's just old Luke, and Luke's waiting on the judgment day. Well, Luke, my friend, what about young Anna Lee? He said, do me a favor, son, won't you stay and keep Anna Lee company? Take a load off Fanny, take a load free, take a load off Fanny, and you put the load right on me.
Crazy Chester followed me and he caught me in the fall. He said, I will fix you right if you take Jack, my dog. I said, wait a minute, Chester, you know I'm a peaceful man. He said, that's okay, boy, won't you feed me when you can?
Yeah, take a load off Fanny, take a load free, take a load off Fanny, and you put the load right on me. It's a cannonball now to take me down the line. My bag is sinking low, and I do believe it's time to get